I love bad video games. To understand your favorite pieces of media, sometimes you have to understand the worst. There's something freeing about playing a bad game, something that's been so panned critically. The bar is low. The opportunity is there to change the narrative and really shock you, but most of the time, that doesn't happen. The game completely meets your expectations in all the worst ways. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. I've selected 9 of the worst reviewed games on the PS2. I selected these games from their Metacritic listings and only allowed myself to select games under a score of 50, meaning that they are displayed in red on the website. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like it and subscribe to the channel. I also have a Patreon in the description if you want to get access to extra content or just support the channel further. Hey Dad, it's me, your favorite son, and today I'd like to talk about bad games. This message is sponsored by Raycon. It's Raycon's anniversary, and the Essential Open Earbuds are stealing the spotlight. They're 30% off. Honestly, these have become my best friend for my daily grind. They're sleek, smart, and way cooler than your average earbuds. Whether I'm working, commuting, or just winding down, they fit right in and make everything just feel a little more fun. Raycon's Essential Open Earbuds keep your ears open while still delivering crystal clear sound. They sit just outside your ear canal so you can stay tuned into traffic, coworkers, or whatever's going on around you without losing out on music or podcast quality. Lightweight and all-day comfortable, they never feel bulky, but they still have a secure fit, meaning they stay put when I'm at the gym or out on a walk. And here's the kicker. Raycon delivers the same premium audio quality as the big brands, but at half the price. Add in over 3 million happy customers and a 30-day happiness guarantee, and there's zero reason to overpay. My favorite feature is the open ear design, which gives you a breathable fit that delivers comfort, safety, and immersive audio while still keeping you aware to your surroundings. Honestly, I wear my Raycon Everyday Essentials all the time, but these Essential Open Earbuds have been working their way into my routine more often these days. It's mostly because it's just nice to wear these when I'm mowing the lawn or skating, and it's nice to still be aware of my surroundings while I'm still listening to music or podcasts or whatever. So click the link in the description box or go to buyraycon.com/yourfavoritesonopen to get 30% off the Essential Open Earbuds. Don't forget that buying these supports the channel as well. That's the link in the description or buyraycon.com/yourfavoritesonopen for 30% off the Essential Open Earbuds. Now back to the video. Remember the 2000s, a time when audiences yearned for edgy media, when everything needed to be dark and cool and handsome, and it had to have a gun. The edginess of the 2000s was a direct response to the bright optimism of the 90s, and it also didn't help that the decade was rung in with the largest terror attack that the United States had ever seen. Regardless, as edgy media succeeded, corporate businessmen in boardrooms all over the world wondered, how the hell can we cash in on this trend? Enter Shadow the Hedgehog. Shadow the Hedgehog is a direct product of the gritty media wave, taking a character from a brightly colored, poppy, and cartoonish series like Sonic and turning them into an edgy amnesiac teen wielding a pistol. This is perhaps what Shadow the Hedgehog is most known for in the wider cultural landscape, its gritty and often corny tone. This is the imprint that it's left on the world and its legacy. But what about the game itself? This 2005 PS2, GameCube, and Xbox release was developed by Sega Studios USA and sees us playing the titular character as he journeys across different worlds, attempting to recover his lost memory and find more out about his past. His only memories are of a strange woman in a laboratory, and as he ponders these thoughts, dark red clouds roll in, summoning hordes of monsters and a strange but powerful force. This force, some dark god, asks Shadow to help him in gathering the Chaos Crystals to bring about the destruction of the world. This is the setup for the game, because Shadow the Hedgehog actually effectively lets us choose between whether we want to assist this dark god, or whether we want to help the other heroes, in that of Sonic, Amy, Knuckles, and others, saving the world, or whether we just want to take the Chaos Emeralds for ourselves, or some other option in between. These choices will determine which levels we play, and which bosses we fight, and which ending we get. Now, before I talk about the game and how it plays, I just need to get this out of the way. I'm not a Sonic fan. I've never really enjoyed any of the Sonic games that I've played. I've tried a lot of the classic entries, and it just really isn't my thing. I don't get it, and frankly, I don't get the fascination with the characters and world. I say this to point out that I am reviewing this game from the perspective of someone who doesn't have a lot of contextual knowledge for this series. I am not a Sonic historian or a Sonic lore expert. I do know that Eggman is the villain sometimes, and that Sonic is the good guy, and that the rings are good, but that's about it. Shadow the Hedgehog feels like a 3D Sonic game for the most part, though. You run through levels with big loops and some platforms, and if you get hit or touch an enemy, you get stunned and your precious golden rings are spilled all over the floor, like a deck of playing cards that you had in your pocket for some reason. Getting hit without any of these rings in your inventory means that you die and start over. In Shadow, this means that you start over from a checkpoint that you've activated on the level. That is, until your lives are expended, and then you start the level over for real. We also contend with a large amount of enemies in this game, ones that we can't just destroy by jumping on their head. We often have to use weapons, both melee and ranged, to defeat them. Shadow can use some basic melee attacks, which rarely ever seem useful, or his homing attack, which is probably the most useful in the game. But the most fun form of offense to utilize are the weapons. These can be retrieved from crates scattered around each stage, or picked up from enemies that we defeat. We can take down our foes with giant robotic spears, we can wield dark alien swords, we can wield assault rifles and machine guns, pistols, any sort of generic general firearm that you can imagine is here. Taking out enemies and generally proceeding towards the funnel that is the end of the level is mostly how you go about each stage, but with each level you generally have 3 options. You can head towards the end and proceed towards the neutral route for that level, picking up the Chaos Emerald that it holds, or you can complete either of the 2 side objectives, both of which align with either hero or dark. The hero missions usually entail either slaughtering the forces of the Black Doom or destroying machinery that the evil force is using to bring about their supposed end times. The dark missions usually see us doing the opposite, slaughtering the forces working against him or taking out their machinery and equipment. Throughout the level, you often have someone in your ear either pushing you toward their goal or yelling at you for messing up their plans, depending on what you've chosen to do. Now, this whole concept is something that I really loved, and it's mostly because this game actually has 11 different endings that you can achieve. These result in everything from seeing Shadow become an angel that saves the world, to crushing it in his omnipotent fist, and there is, of course, everything in between. This is all determined by the choices that you make along the way. How many dark side missions you've completed, how many hero missions you completed, and how many normal missions you completed. This whole concept is awesome, and something I really honestly want more of in the modern day. Shorter games that you can complete in a couple of hours or so, but that need to be replayed a dozen times to see everything they have to offer. But once you get down into the nitty-gritty, Shadow's cracks really start to show. The level design isn't the greatest, and these objectives that you have to complete to see each ending are sometimes, if not incredibly tedious, then ridiculously difficult to find. In the first level, for example, perhaps the most simple of them all, you can either head straight to the Chaos Emerald to complete the normal mission, or defeat either the soldiers fighting against the newly summoned monsters for the dark side, or the monsters themselves for the hero side. Completing either of the missions that require you to kill enemies is an incredibly boring task that will most definitely see you wandering from checkpoint to checkpoint, trying to find that one last flying monster that you missed. And the problem with this is that if you maybe messed up and completed the mission in a way you didn't intend to, you have to start back from the beginning of the story, which is at least 6 stages long. These endings are rewarding and interesting, but also the whole process is a tedious slog. Not to mention the fact that a lot of the levels themselves really have no flow and left me searching for a few seconds, looking for the next path I was meant to take. And in a game about speed and motion, stopping is the enemy, and Shadow the Hedgehog has a lot of stopping. At the end of the day, I would put this game somewhere in the mixed bag pile. All my complaints do not outweigh the interesting stuff that the game is doing, and seeing a red and black hedgehog wielding a pistol, searching for his lost past, is just crazy enough that it kind of works. Part of me, though, wishes that this game went all the way. I mean, Shadow really only ever says damn. Where's the gore? Where's the full curse words? I don't want to see Shadow say damn. I want to see him say fuck. I want him to splatter the brains of his foes on the walls. Then I think this game would have stood the test of time as a true oddity. Now it really only stands around as that time that Sega attempted to make Sonic into a more edgy franchise, and it didn't really work. Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles must be one of the cartoon series to get the most video game adaptations in history. There are so many Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtle games that it makes my head spin. And listen, I have great memories of playing Turtles in Time on the SNES when I was a kid. That game is a classic, and there are many TMNT classics that have released throughout the years, but Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles 2 Battle Nexus is not one of them. The game itself is based around the second season of the 2003 TV series. In fact, the game actually just uses a ton of cutscenes and clips directly from the show. There really aren't any 3D cutscenes designed by the game, it's just all sections directly taken from the TV series. But the actual game, TMNT 2 Battle Nexus, is an exercise in pain and nothing else. The game is primarily a up to 4-person co-op game. You can play with 4 people, each person controlling one of the turtles. But you can also play the game solo, controlling all 4 turtles and switching between them with the click of a button. Each turtle is supposed to have a different set of skills, thus necessitating the switching between them, but these things rarely come up in gameplay. Leonardo can slice trees, pillars, grates, bamboo, and grass with his katanas. Raphael can lift objects and push boxes. Michelangelo can use his nunchucks to hover, and Donatello can operate computer consoles. But like I said, these rarely ever come up in the level design. It honestly feels like an afterthought, like these computer consoles and big boxes were put in after the fact to make the game more reliant on the character switching. There is some variety in the way the characters fight though. Some do a bit more damage and some take a bit more damage. They each have their own weapons and their basic combos have different animations. But the reason that I call this game an exercise in pain is mostly because of the enemies. The game's combat is just not tuned at all, especially not to a single player experience. The combat is basically just ramming your head into a wall repeatedly until hopefully the wall breaks or you die. There are no combos in the game, despite the manual claiming so. Maybe I just really couldn't figure out how you're supposed to input these, but they just wouldn't work. The only thing you can really do is a short 3-button combo of the light attack and a square attack. I couldn't pull off any of the listed attacks in the manual, despite how hard I tried. Most of the early stage enemies are easy enough. Execute these combos, block here and there, and eventually take them out. But eventually you get to a point in the game where you might as well just run past certain enemies because they are almost impossible to fight without taking a ton of damage. These small velociraptors, for example, are one of the most annoying enemies in the game. Even if you manage to hit them with the light combo, you don't have enough time before their retaliatory attack to block, jump away, or even move. These will often stun you or push you back, leaving you to start the whole thing over again. Your heavy attack can often push enemies away, but it's so close range that you're almost always leaving yourself open to be hit. And don't even get me started on the ranged enemies. There's just absolutely no way to block projectiles or even avoid them. You just have to take the blasting, fall to the ground, and hope that the enemy doesn't capitalize by the time you've gotten up. This game is endlessly frustrating to engage with on its own terms. But a few hours in, I was looking at some reviews in old game magazines and found out that most people that talked about the game called it too easy. This is because the game basically lets you run past any enemy in the game. You can just run through the levels and totally avoid the foes and complete the level just fine. There are some areas where you might have to defeat enemies to open a door or to actually complete the level itself, but these are few and far between. These reviews made me realize that I had made the mistake of attempting to engage with the game the way that it wanted me to. I was actually supposed to ignore everything the game gave me and wander off into the sunset. There's also some incredibly annoying jumping puzzles in this game, and they're coupled with a platforming system that is less than half-baked. Wall jumping will often leave your turtle careening in a completely different direction than you wanted it to. Like everything else in the game, it just doesn't work. If I could give this game one bit of praise, it's the home base. You can travel to the turtle's home base from the overworld map at any time. Here we can view collectible antiques that we pick up in April's shop. We can view background art or concept drawings that we get from completing levels, and even compete in tournaments to get prizes, but I have no idea why you would want to do that. From what I read, the original TMNT arcade game is also included in here somewhere, but I couldn't stomach playing the game long enough to unlock it. TMNT 2 Battle Nexus is simply a torturous experience if you engage with the game on its own level. Then it feels as if you're harvesting pain for some sort of larger purpose, unbeknownst to the lowly consumers of media. And if you ignore its prompts for combat, then you end up completing what is essentially a ton of short levels that last no more than 1 minute in the interest of zooming in on low-res character drawings. An exercise in pain. There are few shows that are less fitting for a video game adaptation than The Sopranos, Breaking Bad, Mad Men, Entourage, just to name a few. But The Sopranos, a critically acclaimed television show centrally focused on a high-ranking mafia member struggling with modern-day issues, both in love with telling an interesting mob story while also subverting classic mob stories by authoring the death of the mafia rules as we know them, doesn't exactly scream great video game to me. Mostly because the scenes in the show that aren't focused on shooting or fighting are generally the most interesting. It's about the aftermath of that, the repercussions, the unspoken truths that these people all feel but won't share. The Sopranos' road to respect doesn't really have any of that, and if it does, it displays only fragments of what the show is able to contextualize. The game itself tells a story focused on Joey LaRocca, a character created for the game who at the beginning is revealed to be the son of, spoiler alert for the show and this game, now deceased Salvatore Bonpensiero, aka Big Pussy. Tony takes him in after he finds him being a general street punk. We follow Joey as he works in Paulie's crew and tries to make a name for himself in Tony Soprano's crime organization. The game's story is actually based on an idea that David Chase had earlier in his writing career, an action comedy about a regular Joe from nowhere who decides he wants to be in the mafia. The game itself obviously doesn't follow that same path. It's made to actually fit within the already established world of The Sopranos. The fact that it's based on series creator David Chase's earlier idea may make you think that he co-signed the game and even worked on it, but that couldn't be further from the truth. In fact, he said that making a video game was not his idea at all, it was spearheaded by HBO executives, and the only thing Chase really did was oversee the script to ensure that it fit in with who the characters actually were in the show. Chase was also majorly concerned with the game bleeding into the show or with the show bleeding into the game. He wanted them to be completely separate, which was understandable. I can imagine Chase foreseeing HBO executives coming off the backs of a successful video game release, asking Chase to put original characters from the game into the show. Luckily, the game was not successful, and is not very good in the first place, so this wasn't something Chase needed to worry about for long. The best thing I can say about this game is that the actors from the show actually reprised their roles for the game. Their performances are decent for the most part, and do make for what is essentially a believable and very weird few episodes of The Sopranos. Getting these actors must have cost a ton as well, because the show had already aired the first half of the 6th season by the time the game released. These actors could not have been cheap, but I do respect getting them for the game. At its best, though, like I said, this game feels like a few very bad, unreflective episodes of The Sopranos. At certain points, it does flirt with the idea of a deeper thematic undertone, but really never taking any of them to their full climax. In one of the introductory missions, Joey and his partner Reggie, a childhood friend, have to ditch a body in the river. They take this body through the dock, stopped by multiple nosy dock workers and security people on the way. When they eventually dump the body, Joey starts to see his dad's ghost, giving him advice and criticizing the decisions that he's made. This is never really explored fully in the game, and perhaps the only real emotional depth that we get from Road to Respect is when Joey is forced to kill his childhood best friend Reggie on Paulie's orders because he knows too much.
We grew up together!
Shut up! This isn't my fault!
Fuck you, Joey! You can't do this!
Joey?
The whole story is tied into this Cold War feud with the Philly Mafia, and it's not that great. I would have preferred if Joey at some point near the end found out that it was Tony who killed his father, and then had to make the choice, whether he wanted to stay with the family, knowing that his father's death was at their hands, or whether he wanted to leave, staying true to his own blood. There's a lot of things you could have done here, and Road to Respect honestly really only scratches the surface. You could make the argument that it's a game and that they only had so much space for dialogue, but this game is mostly dialogue and very shoddy cutscenes with stilted, simple animations.
Don't you start wearing that thing. Give it here. You ever been to a bar mitzvah?
He's back. Chad Bukowski, that field goal kicker from New York.
Did you show by this time?
The game itself is laid out in missions. Each mission generally sees us heading back to the Bada Bing, a central location from the show, and getting orders from someone in the family. Paulie, Christopher, Tony, etc. Dumping a body at the docks and then dealing with Reggie and getting him out of some shit afterwards, or helping Christopher shake down some guys at a gym that he gets a cut from. During these missions, there will be ample moments when someone gets in our way or tries to stop us from meeting our goal. We either have to talk these people down or fight them. When talking to people, we have 3 options of approach: tough, smooth, or neutral. Tough usually results in Joey throwing around a lot of fucks and most of the time getting into a fight. Smooth is either Joey apologizing or hitting on women, and neutral is just like a normal, natural response. Though normal in the world of The Sopranos probably leans further on the side of tough than it does neutral.
I need some assistance on a deal, if you catch my drift. $200 is the fee.
Hey, I pay my fucking barber $200.
Everything else is basically fighting. We get into a lot of fistfights in this game, sometimes 5 or 6 in the same mission. We fight security guards who get in our way. We fight guys running parties in the casino, many gym rats when helping Christopher. We can do light attacks, heavy attacks, and grapples. The grapples allow us to take someone to the ground, do regular close attacks on someone, or special attacks which are earned as we make our way through the story. The combat system is pretty bland and gets very old very quickly, especially when there's an enemy that just blocks all your attacks and spams the grapple button over and over. This results in our characters just going down to the ground and standing up repeatedly like they're rehearsing some sort of scene. If you want, you can also just straight up kill people by shooting them, but this incurs a heavy toll. On the HUD, there is a health bar, a respect meter, and a star meter. The stars determine how public of an area we're in. If you kill someone in a no-star area, you won't lose any respect from the Mafia. If you kill someone in a 3-star area, you'll lose a ton. If your respect reaches 0, then you lose the game because the family decides to have you killed. You can recharge your respect by paying money to Polly, who also offers collectible art that can be purchased for thousands of dollars. This mechanic is interesting, and I do respect the game for trying to adhere to the rules of the world somewhat. You can't just go around killing everyone that you meet, and if you do, there are repercussions. Killing someone essentially becomes a last-ditch effort, and I really only did it when I realized I was getting my ass beat and had no other option. Road to Respect does have some unique ideas, and I respect the devs for not just turning the game into an action shootout warfest game, because that's honestly what I expected. It plays more like a spin-off of The Sopranos, but that spin-off isn't particularly good. This is mostly in comparison to the show that it's based on, probably one of, if not the best television shows ever made. Inviting comparisons like this essentially sets you up for failure. It's deciding going into it that you aren't going to win, but you're going to try anyways. I have a lot of respect for this game, for not falling into the traditional trappings of licensed video games of the time, for not completely butchering the source material, for getting the original cast to voice their characters, for trying. But try as they may, Road to Respect isn't really a good video game.
This ain't happy hour. Take over. My manicure's fucking ruined.
I said previously that The Sopranos was probably the best TV show ever made, but Star Trek is one of my favorite TV shows, by far. That being said, there are exactly 1 million different Star Trek games, and I haven't played a single one that I really enjoyed. Aside from Bridge Crew. Bridge Crew's great. Shattered Universe follows that tradition of essentially creating whatever in the Star Trek name, slapping some mechanics in there, and calling it a day. At its core, the game is a standard space combat simulator. We fly ships around and fight other enemy fighter ships while trying to defend the ISS Excelsior from attacks. Sometimes we'll head out to retrieve resources in the surrounding areas of space, sometimes we'll have to destroy secondary objectives, but the biggest sin that Shattered Universe commits is that it's just kind of boring. The combat is essentially the same every time we go out. We can pick up different ships as we complete missions. These ships have different stats and weapons, hull strength, shield strength, and different photon or laser beams we can fight with. I essentially only ever used the photon beam though because all the other weapons were so impractical and difficult to make shots with. The beam at least can be adjusted after firing. The other weapons that can't really only are good for shooting stationary targets, maybe a ship that's sat in the middle of space or some clamps on a dry dock that need destroyed. Moving ships, though, essentially require the beam. The story itself is wacky and over the top and mostly lacks what I like about Star Trek in the first place, but it's probably the most interesting part of the game. The game actually takes place in the Mirror Universe, which, if you aren't familiar, is an alternate timeline in the Star Trek series. It was first introduced in the original series' second season episode, Mirror Mirror, where Kirk, Uhura, Scotty, and McCoy all switch places with their Mirror Universe counterparts. They find that the Mirror Universe is full of alternate versions of their own selves that are far more violent and hostile. The universe was then expanded upon in Deep Space Nine, Enterprise, and heavily represented in, that one. In Shattered Universe, Sulu actually finds himself in the same predicament that the other crew members were in during the TOS episodes. He swaps place with his ISS Enterprise Mirror Universe counterpart and is promptly put into a war against the Mirror Universe version of Chekhov. After quickly escaping evil Chekhov, it's up to Sulu to figure out how to get out of this place and prevent his entire ship from being destroyed. We essentially take orders from Sulu and command a fighter protecting the ship and taking out its enemies. There are some interesting references here to the original series. Some of the missions actually see us dealing with mirror versions of anomalies that the USS Enterprise dealt with in the original show. But of course, these are all viewed through the lens of a fighter pilot, so we're just shooting shit and hoping that it all works out, essentially. That's sort of my problem with most Star Trek video games. Very few have tried to nail what made Star Trek really interesting in the first place. It was rarely ever the combat, but the actual predicaments themselves, the moral quandaries, the choices that had to be made, the mysteries that needed to be solved. Of course, if you want to just make a game about shooting stuff and combat in the Star Trek universe, then you need some sort of justification for this, and the mirror universe is the perfect justification. What if everyone was evil? That's sort of the mold that most Star Trek games fit into. How can we make this as action-packed as possible? I think my ideal Star Trek game would probably mostly be a linear narrative game. Third-person action sequences to break up the long cutscenes when they're needed for the story, but mostly based around choices and branching pathways. The battles are fun, sure, but they aren't what interested me in the series in the first place. Shattered Universe really has nothing that interested me in the series in the first place, and the battles aren't even fun. I would only recommend playing this if, for some reason, you have managed to play every single other Star Trek game and you need something to feed your rampant addiction. State of Emergency 2 is a sequel to the 2002 PlayStation 2, Xbox, and Windows released game, State of Emergency. State of Emergency was about an American trade organization formed from big businesses that took control over the United States. In the wake of that totalitarian regime, a group called Freedom rose up to try and take them down. State of Emergency 2 takes place years later and follows the Freedom members as they once again try to rise up against the corporation. State of Emergency 2 feels like one of those middle-of-the-road games that don't really get released anymore. Those budget third-person action shooters that were all too common in the mid-2000s. There were hundreds of them on the PlayStation 2, mostly forgettable budget titles, but I'm sure they mattered to a ton of people, and there was something special about them. I can't say all of these titles are good or even passable, and I can't really say that about State of Emergency 2, but I just want you all to at least pour one out for this genre because it is far and long gone from the world now. State of Emergency 2 is mostly a third-person shooter. We run around environments, shooting enemies and trying to make it to an objective. We pick up ammo, weapons, and health from the enemies that we've killed, eventually collecting an arsenal of assault rifles, pistols, SMGs, rockets, sniper rifles, and remote bombs. This combat system is verging on unbearable, though. Held together with sticks and twine, it feels like it's constantly on the precipice of bursting at the seams. It doesn't, however. It does continue to function, and this rudimentary, cobbled-together construction manages to persist throughout the game's runtime, but goddamn is it clunky. Movements are janky and jerked, and you better be using an automatic weapon because you're going to want to just aim at the headline and repeatedly fire, hoping that the enemies run into your bullets. And they do. And when they do, it does often feel satisfying. But when it doesn't work, you're blaming the game, not yourself. Speaking of enemies, the AI is awful. They do not run from doorways in front of you and then find cover somewhere in your sightline to fire. They either run in predictable patterns across the screen, leaving a group open to repeated headshots, or they rush past our character, wandering to some far-off point behind us, leaving the player scrambling to move back to a further point and readjust. These movements are predictable, and you can even ensure that a group of enemies is going to run into your bullet stream. The satisfaction doesn't come from well-crafted gameplay. It essentially comes from a one-shot kill simulation. It feels as if this game was crafted in a sandbox meant to get the player in and killing as many enemies as they can, with no regard to challenge, design, or structure. The intent is for you to feel good killing enemies and then move on to the next batch, no matter how it's done. The story is alright for what it is, essentially a cartoony and goofy tale about a ragtag group of revolutionaries, certainly trying to recreate the success that the Grand Theft Auto games had, but without any of the substance those stories were trying to offer. It's It's also worth noting that this game would release in the same year as the first Saints Row, so there's that. For the most part, State of Emergency 2 is hollow. The first game was praised for its action, but mostly for its technical impressiveness on the systems of the time, primarily the ability to display so many character models on screen at one time. The second game seems dead set on furthering this as well, constantly clogging up areas with innocents that we might accidentally shoot, and then punishing us for it on the rating screen. But most every review that I've read for the second game notes the same thing, that just about every action game on the market was doing exactly what this game was doing, but just doing it far better. If we ignore the state of the gaming industry at the time, then State of Emergency 2 is fine, mostly a hollow experience that might bring you some light joy at different moments, but it won't impress. But taking that context into consideration, this game was pointless for the time, a generic rehash of accomplishments that had already been completed with A+ scores instead of half-heartedly. Forced tank sections, stealth, and sniping doesn't help this game. They only further create annoyance in its dopamine-fueled kill simulator, and they put the focus on the poor controls, forcing the player to engage with them even further past what they're already comfortable with. Games like State of Emergency 2 don't get made today, but maybe that's for good reason. Mcfarlane's Evil Prophecy is a miserable experience, one where I can see the vision. Through the toxic smoke choking the player like a cloud of gas, you can see slight shimmers of light, what this game was supposed to be, or what it should have been. I played this game for a little over 2 hours, though, and that vision became harder to see the further I went in. The cavern was dark, and at a certain point, specifically the moment when I stopped playing the game, I couldn't see the light behind me anymore. The game itself was developed by Konami, specifically their Hawaii division, which was shut down around 2 years after this game's release in 2004. The game has creatures that are based on Mcfarlane's action figures, also based on classic characters like the werewolf, the mummy, and Frankenstein's monster. The game's introductory animated cutscene is probably the last interesting and special thing that this game does. This is immediately followed by a scroll of text that wanders down the screen for literally 3 minutes and 30 seconds. There is very little information in this scroll despite it being so long. It could have been summed up like this. There are monsters in this world. A prophecy foresees the end. 4 heroes are going to deal with it. Done. In all seriousness, there is some more information here, like the fact that Dr. Hans Jaeger is leading this group and has funded their monster hunting adventures to come. Each character is given a bit of a backstory: a pirate who lost his ship, a gunslinger, and a shaman. Hans Jaeger himself is a man of machinery and joins the party as well. We then head out on the most tedious adventure of our lives, spending the next hour and a half killing hundreds, literally hundreds, of the same 3 enemies over and over again. In the first area, we have some statues that we can interact with, which gives us very basic combos that we can use to attack enemies. Essentially, each of these 4 characters is supposed to have their own fighting style, and they sort of do, but it doesn't really affect much. They can all do a smashing combo, a basic combo, an uppercut combo, and a crowd control combo. These combos can be leveled up by using them, and they will gain power over time. This is meant to entice you and make you believe that there is some sort of progression system in this game. And maybe there is, but you sure can't feel its effects at all. There are these super-powered attacks that each character can use, which spends the small yellow bar below our health, but these rarely ever do anything, or miss all the enemies entirely, leaving you in a great position to be smacked in the head. With a pretty rudimentary combat system, you would probably want to make up for it with execution, enemy variety, story, and aesthetics. Unfortunately, Evil Prophecy fails in just about all of these departments as well. The combat feels clunky and underbaked. Inputting combos mostly works, but only if your character is at a standstill for a second before inputting them. And also, you'll just randomly jump sometimes, which throws off your combo execution entirely. And top this off with the fact that Evil Prophecy has so many fucking enemies, you get an absolute slog of a video game. The first thing we see in this game is a graveyard that we need to advance through. This graveyard is filled with enemies. In fact, 2 enemy types, a mutant or undead dog, and some other undead bipedal creation. They usually appear from the ground in groups of 4 or 5. The groundskeeper here wants us to prove ourselves by defeating all of the enemies before he'll let us into the next gate. This results in literally 10 minutes of running around this small area and fighting the same enemies over and over again. I kept thinking I had killed enough enemies and would go back to check at the NPC to see if he would let me in, because I was in total shock that this was still going on. But that's only the tip of the iceberg, because for the next 1 hour of levels, groups of 6 of these enemies will spawn every 5 feet that we move. Now, to be fair to the game, you can just run past some of these enemies, but God, is it awful. There really is no challenge here either. Take on 5 or 500 of these enemies and it doesn't matter. It's just mashing combos until they're turned into blobs of disappearing red goop. Even if you get hit or caught in a combo, they take little to no health off your meter. No, that challenge comes with the first boss that absolutely decimates all of your teammates almost immediately. Because even though the AI is good at fighting stupid low-level mobs, it can't dodge or really preserve itself for longer than 2 seconds against something that actually does damage. And I can't blame the AI, I think it is rejecting the game itself, because by this point, you know there is no reason to go on. Why continue with this? The futility washes over you like a hot shower. Enter its embrace. Shut the game off. And again, there are no redeeming parts here. The game is an eyesore as well. Everything is covered in this gray-green puke color. Stone walls and dirt surround you. The characters are not visually distinct enough from each other to notice them in the massive models all slamming into each other. Where's my character? What is he doing? Who knows? Any shot of a fight in this game is marred with a terrible camera angle that's caught on terrain and bodies slamming up against each other. Mcfarlane's Evil Prophecy is one of those rare games that come along every once in a while. A game that never really had a glimmer of hope. Maybe that light that I saw through the smoke was imagined. A mirage that I wanted to be there, but wasn't. The benefit of the doubt slowly disappearing as I realized it was smoke all along. In short, in far less flowery terms, don't play this. As a child, I have a distinct memory of the first time I watched Adult Swim. I stayed the night at my friend's house, assuming that I would only be there to play Halo and Fusion Frenzy on the original Xbox and stuff my face with as much pizza as I could. But as the night drew on, he urged a few of us to stay up later so that we could watch these crazy cartoons that only aired later into the evening. Eventually, Cartoon Network gave way to Adult Swim, and we were greeted with what felt like a secret, something waiting just beneath the surface of everyday life, a truth no one spoke out loud. Xavier Renegade Angel, Tom Goes to the Mayor, home movies, and of course, Aqua Teen Hunger Force. This is a memory that a lot of you probably share with me, a bygone experience that's, for current generations, probably transposed onto the internet. And if I had known that there was an Aqua Teen Hunger Force game as a kid, I would have definitely bugged my dad until he bought it for me. This game did really pass me by though, and honestly, that was probably for the best. Aqua Teen Hunger Force Zombie Ninja Pro-Am is actually a golfing game, believe it or not. The game begins as Frylock reveals he's been accepted into a country club, and Shake is determined to win a golfing tournament there. In the game, we play different holes of golf and meet characters from the show. The golfing system is simple. We time a button press to gauge our power, and then a button press to gauge our accuracy. Even though the system is incredibly simple, it is so poorly designed and ruins even what little the game has going for it. First of all, the place that you aim your ball is very rarely ever correct. Even if you manage to time all your button presses perfectly, the ball still often goes way further than you aimed, rolling further off the green than you intended to. On top of that, the speed of the marker changes when it gets to the bottom half, so you're expecting and timing for one speed, but the speed of the marker just slows down at the bottom. Why does this happen? God only knows. This is all sort of moot because the golfing in this game is like kind of secondary, even though it's what the entire game is based around and takes up a major portion of the playtime. It doesn't really seem to matter whether you actually do good in the golfing portion or get good scores. You'll still just advance to the next level no matter what. The interesting thing about the game is that in between golfing, you have to actually walk to where you hit the ball. During these sections, you can wander around the environment and search for collectibles, health pickups, weapon power-ups, and fight enemies. The system around combat is also incredibly simple though. You have a basic attack and a block, and that's about it. You can also charge up your attacks, but it's rarely ever useful because it takes so long. You basically just spam attacks over and over again, and it's damn near impossible to die. You have lives in the game, but I never died, not even when I was just standing in front of the enemies and getting hit. There are some random kart racing levels that happen in between a few sections of golf, but these are also rudimentary and not really interesting at all. You just race around the course and get missiles to attack the other racer or speed boosts. I think the whole idea with the game, judging by how the co-creators of Aqua Teen Hunger Force talked about it in the extras, was that it was mostly a joke. And it is kind of a funny bit to create a golf game around Aqua Teen Hunger Force because it's not really what people would expect, but it's not funny enough to justify a purchase or wasting your time on playing and beating it. That being said, the cutscenes in the game and voice lines are probably the best part. Most of it just does feel like an episode of the show, and it's decent, probably because the creators were so heavily involved.
I'm talking to you.
Using the X button.
What's an X? Headshot. Nice follow through.
Very nice follow through. With practice, you too will learn how to kill.
From that perspective, the story is sort of a decent time. It just feels like more of the show. Speaking of that, there are little cameo clips from the show that you can find around the map, and even an episode of the show that hadn't been released at the time. The episode would eventually premiere in the 5th season, but if you bought the game when it came out, you would have gotten to see it early, which is honestly kind of cool for the time. Overall, this game is just kind of awful. There really isn't anything to it aside from the Aqua Teen Hunger Force skin. I would have much rather just walked around killing these nothing enemies and collecting items than interface with the poorly implemented golfing minigames. It's not really disappointing because I didn't expect much from this in the first place, but that being said, I wouldn't touch this game at all, and maybe just watch the cutscenes online if you're a big fan. During the early 2000s, professional wrestling was winding down from its peak popularity. It had achieved massive success with American audiences, but things wouldn't reach that height again for a while, if ever. But that didn't mean that companies weren't flooding the market with wrestling video games. Backyard Wrestling was a part of this flood, and the first game was successful enough to get a sequel. Attempting to go for a more niche audience within the wrestling scene, viewers that wanted a more hardcore and stripped-back experience. Backyard Wrestling 2 follows suit with this style, allowing players to wrestle in backyards, trailer parks, and pools. The biggest criticism that I have about this game is just that it's very repetitive and simple. The combat system, even for the time, isn't really anything special. We can perform light and heavy attacks, and with a different button, grapples. We can adjust these attacks and grabs to do different moves. We can pick up weapons to attack enemies with. We can do super moves. We can even jump off of nearby objects and do high flyer abilities. Submission, pins, and knockouts all get us wins. But if you know anything about wrestling games of the time, this is pretty standard fare. The game wasn't really offering anything new to the player. New to the series, you could now block, but that wasn't exactly revolutionary. The AI is pretty rudimentary as well, and you can pretty easily cheese the system by running away from the enemy so they stop blocking. And these aren't like secrets that the game is hiding, they're just things that you pretty easily pick up on after playing for about a half an hour or so. The game's progression and story is incredibly boring though. As I started the game, I did the first natural thing, which was select the first stage and start doing battles. The game kept asking me if I wanted to move to the next match when I won, and I did this about 10 times before I realized this must not be a part of the story mode. Going back to the menu, I realized you're actually supposed to select mission to do the story, which, makes sense, I guess. The actual story is basically just these very bland, almost tutorial exercises. They eat up a ton of time because each time you want to do this, you have to go into a match, complete the blocks, grapples, or attacks that the game wants you to, and then head back out to the main menu to select a new one. This wouldn't be that tedious if loading in and out of a mission didn't take forever, but these missions don't have to be completed in one match. They can actually be completed across multiple, which is nice. But it would be nice if the game automatically advanced you to the next one without you having to complete a match before the actual mission ends. It's just incredibly boring and bland, and it's a shame because the game actually has some really cool features. For example, the actual roster of the game is loaded with a ton of insane names. Hardcore wrestlers like New Jack, Ryuji Ito, and my personal favorite, ECW's Sandman. Musician Andrew WK makes an appearance, and Violent J and Shaggy 2 Dope of the Insane Clown Posse do as well, one of them even gracing the cover. There's also some adult stars in the game, which is just wild. But these fighters have to be unlocked through the story. But honestly, I couldn't get through the minutia of repeating missions to get these unlocked. I also forgot to mention that our main character voice makes him seem like not the coolest wrestler in the world, but an awkward and emotionless dweeb that somehow ended up backyard wrestling.
I need a real challenge. Just go home now. I'm going to win it all.
While I do admire the style and commitment to giving fans of underground or hardcore wrestling something to chew on, nothing else here really comes through. It's not a horrible game in general, it just doesn't have enough to necessitate the playtime that it wants you to put in. The game gives you an entire field of tall grass to cut down, but you're only equipped with a Fisher-Price plastic knife. I'm sure there are some people that will like the quaint nature of this game, its simplicity, and the fact that it's a product of a completely different time, marketing itself to an audience that's kinda gone at this point, at least in its original form, but honestly, it just wasn't really for me. Made Man likes to fancy itself a Scorsese video game, clearly taking inspiration from the ages of mafia and mob films that came before it. The main premise of the game is that a man named Joey, a part of the mob, is heading to the Dawn to get made, becoming an official member of the crew. On the car ride over, Joey is telling his nephew how he got to this place, how he rose in the ranks and got involved in the mob in the first place. These reflections and flashbacks are narrated by Joey, and it's clear the game takes a lot of inspiration from Goodfellas, but in some other ways, the game is pretty ahead of its time.
Turns out the manager was a non-vet who'd got himself shot and sent home just before my tour had started. He liked to talk, and since I'd been alone on the road for days, it made for a change. Besides, the waitress Doris wasn't entirely unpleasant on the eyes.
Made Man is generally just a third-person shooter. Like State of Emergency 2 earlier in this video, we run around killing enemies and use a variety of weapons. We can dual-wield just about any of these weapons, which is pretty satisfying in combat. The shooting here is chunky though, and the whole system has a bit more weight. It also helps that the game actually has a cover mechanic. There are stealth levels where you can sneak around, but they aren't forced, and even when I tried to stealth, it seemed like the game didn't want me to, so I'm not sure it's even supposed to work. As a game, this seems also pretty similarly inspired by the Max Payne games. There is a slowdown mechanic that we can activate when we get enough kills, and this slows time for a short period. It's not the best, and we can't dive shoot or anything, but it is serviceable. There's some odd things here though, like the fact that years before Max Payne would do it, there's a shootout in a cemetery sequence, and that we're getting flashbacks to Joey's time in the war, which was also years before Mafia 2 would do that. That's kind of why I say that this game was a bit ahead of its time. But being first to something doesn't mean that you've won. Mafia 2 implements the flashback to war in its story and narrative much better than Made Man does. In Made Man, it's just a fact of life. It's never treated as anything more or used to further an overall theme. In some ways, Made Man sort of fixes all of my complaints with mediocre shooters of this era. It's slightly challenging, there's some interesting mechanics, and I love the story idea of a sort of interview with a mafia member as he reflects on how he got here. I could easily see a sequel set 15 years later as he's bleeding out in an ambulance, confessing everything to some paramedic, and we slowly see through the flashbacks how the family fell apart. But on the other side of that coin, Made Man can be pretty clunky. The cover system sometimes gets stuck, the aiming isn't the greatest, and certain sections of the game can drag. The level design can be a bit all over the place, and a phrase you will be muttering to yourself quite a lot during your playtime is, "Where the fuck am I supposed to go?" But I can't say that I hated this game. Hell, if it looks interesting, I would actually recommend going and checking it out. It's not going to blow your shoes off your feet, but it's a fun time for what it is. Interestingly enough, the people behind the game had a pretty tough go of it too. Made Man originally started development under Acclaim's Manchester studio. But when Acclaim fell apart, some of the employees formed their own studio called Silverback Studios. They literally only made this game before their studio also had to shut down, assumingly due to poor sales of Made Man. Most of the team then reformed as the Manchester office of Swordfish Studios, who was owned by Vivendi. Swordfish was then sold to Activision, and their Manchester office became Monumental Games. They also seem to have shut down in 2011. Regardless of all of that history, I would still recommend checking out Made Man. It's a decent mafia game that is certainly a relic of its era. It wears its inspirations on its sleeve, but it's also ahead of the curve in a few places that I don't think it got respect for when it was released. Most of the reviews lambasted it as a bland shooter, and in some ways it is, but that clearly isn't the full picture here and is selling the game a bit short. Once again, we've talked about another 9 of the worst reviewed games on the PS2. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to like the video and subscribe to the channel, as it really helps me out. You can also join this list of amazing people here by joining my Patreon and getting access to extra content, which supports the channel even further. Let me know if you played any of the games on this list in the comments. Did I get it wrong? Do you think any of these are actually underrated gems, or are they just as terrible as I thought? Let me know in the comments below. As a bit of an update, I'm currently working on my Silent Hill F review, Resident Evil Outbreak, which both will be out relatively soon. It's probably going to take a while to parse through F, just like my Death Stranding 2 review, but keep an eye out for that one. Once again, thank you for watching. See you next time. Bye, Dad.